23 family members flew halfway across America to toast my sister's flashy renewal in Sedona. 31 days later, not one drove less than 2 hours for my wedding. 41 days after that, my phone exploded with apologies. They finally realized my average hotel manager husband actually controls the lifeline to everything they built on debt and lies. What they do not understand is I stopped waiting to be chosen, and this time, I kept every single receipt. My name is Piper Galloway. I am 32 years old, and I have spent the vast majority of my life learning how to take up as little space as humanly possible. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, a mountain city wrapped in blue ridges and quiet, heavy fog. It is a place that feels grounded and real, which is precisely the opposite of the blinding, manicured glare of my family's world back in Greenville, South Carolina. Up here in the cold air, I run a freelance studio called Pineglass Story Lab. I am a documentary editor and a visual designer. I take hours of raw, messy human footage and weave it into something that actually means something. Sometimes I piece together slow, emotional local documentaries about Appalachian history. Other times, to keep the lights on and the rent paid. I edit highly produced boss revenge stories for social media channels. I know exactly how to cut the music, frame the drama, and time the exact second the creator looks dead into the lens and tells their audience to like, subscribe, and drop a comment to boost the algorithm. I am intimately familiar with how to construct a compelling narrative. I know how to find the hidden truth in the background of a chaotic shot. Yet, for 32 years, I could not figure out how to edit myself into the center of my own family's story. If you truly want to understand the Galloway family, you simply need to look at my mother, Elise Galloway. She is the founder and owner of Velvet Lane Celebrations, a high-end event planning empire that orchestrates the kind of Southern society weddings where the floral budget alone could buy a comfortable suburban house. Elise does not just host events, she curates alternate realities. Everything in her orbit must be flawless, perfectly symmetrical, and draped in imported silk. She is a woman who speaks in soft, honeyed southern tones, while her eyes silently evaluate the net worth of your shoes and the lineage of your last name. To Elise, perception is not just reality. Perception is the only currency that matters. Then there is my father, Warren Galloway. He is a sharply dressed, impeccably polite man who has built his entire earthly existence around a single, unflinching philosophy: do not, under any circumstances, make anyone uncomfortable. He would rather sit in a burning room and compliment the warmth of the fire than politely point out to the arsonist that they dropped a match. His passivity is a quiet, suffocating kind of violence. It is a complicity I have swallowed at every holiday dinner, every birthday, and every graduation since I was a child. He watches the damage happen, offers a sad little smile, and looks the other way. But the absolute, undeniable center of the Galloway solar system is my younger sister, Sloane. Sloane is not just a daughter, she is a lifestyle brand. She is a social media fixture, a walking, talking vision of modern domestic perfection, with a feed full of carefully curated beige aesthetics, sponsored luxury trips, and staged candid laughter. To my parents, Sloane is the upgraded, premium version of everything I ever attempted to be. Where I am quiet and observant, she is aggressively radiant. Where I document the world, she demands the world document her. And her husband, Rhett Holloway, is the perfect co-star for her production. Rhett owns Stonehaven House Collection, a rapidly expanding chain of luxury wedding and event venues. He is a man who never simply enters a room, he acquires the airspace. He speaks exclusively in corporate buzzwords, synergy, and growth metrics, treating every casual family conversation like a high-stakes business pitch waiting for a signature. He wears custom-tailored suits, laughs entirely too loud at his own jokes, and looks at people as if he is calculating their immediate return on investment. You can see exactly how much you matter to the Galloway family simply by looking at where you are seated at our monthly Sunday dinners. Imagine the grand dining room in my parents' sprawling Greenville estate. The table is a massive slab of polished mahogany, always meticulously set with the heavy antique silver and starched linen napkins. At the head of the table sits my father, usually smiling vaguely at a spot on the wall. Immediately to his right, in the seat of honor, is Elise. Glued to her side is Sloane. The two of them spend hours with their heads leaning together, whispering about exclusive guest lists, vendor contracts, and country club gossip that I am never privy to. Right in the middle of the table, dominating the conversation, is Rhett, swirling a heavy glass of expensive bourbon and holding court about his latest real estate acquisition. And then there is me. I am always, without fail, assigned the chair at the very end of the long table, pushed close to the swinging kitchen door. It is the tactical position reserved for the person who is expected to stand up and refill the crystal water pitchers, clear the salad plates, and fetch the extra butter from the fridge. I am present, technically speaking, but I am never asked for my opinion. Rhett, tell us more about the new property in Charleston. Elise will coo, leaning forward with rapt attention. It is a gold mine, Elise. 100% pure profit potential once we rebrand the ballroom. Rhett will boom, his voice echoing off the chandelier. I will sit by the kitchen door, quietly eating my green beans. If I ever try to speak, my voice is instantly swallowed by Rhett's booming laugh or my mother's sudden, urgent need to inspect the temperature of the roast beef. I am the physical embodiment of an afterthought. My mother has a highly specific, deeply insulting way of dismissing my entire livelihood. Whenever a distant relative or an industry friend asks what her oldest daughter does for a living, Elise waves a manicured hand in the air and offers a tight, practiced smile. Piper makes those cute little art videos, she will say, her tone dripping with a polite, southern brand of condescension. She does freelance computer things. She is very independent. She says it as if I spend my days finger painting in a damp basement. The bitter, unspoken irony of this family is that when Velvet Lane Celebrations or Stonehaven House face a catastrophic public relations disaster, I am the one they call in the middle of the night. When Rhett's flagship venue had a massive pipe burst that ruined a high-profile wedding and the horrific footage leaked all over the internet, it was my cute little art videos skills that saved them. I quietly and quickly edited the damage control campaign, smoothing out the narrative, fixing the color grading, and saving their lucrative deposits. I do the heavy, messy lifting in the shadows, but when the sun comes up and the crisis is averted, I am instantly relegated back to being a hobbyist in their eyes. Over the decades, I became deeply conditioned to be the easy one. I am the low-maintenance daughter. I am the sister who will never cause a scene. I am the family member who is perpetually just fine. If my birthday dinner is casually canceled because Sloane suddenly needs help picking out a new backdrop for her brand shoot, I force a smile and say I completely understand. If my father forgets to call me for 3 solid weeks, I tell myself he is just overwhelmed with managing my mother's intense schedules. I have spent my entire adulthood absorbing their casual neglect and repackaging it as my own personal resilience. I convinced myself that needing nothing was a form of strength. But here is the most agonizing, sharpest truth about the Galloway family: they do not hate me. Hate requires passion. Hate requires a specific kind of focus and energy. If they truly hated me, it would mean they actually saw me as a person worthy of strong emotion. Instead, they do something far more insidious and cruel. They treat me as if I am entirely disposable. They operate under the absolute, unquestioned certainty that they can overlook me, sideline me, and push me to the very edge of the frame, and there will never, ever be a consequence. They believe my loyalty is an infinite, unbreakable resource. They built a glittering, loud, expensive world where Piper Galloway is just a quiet ghost hovering by the kitchen door, watching them feast. They thought I would stay in that chair, silently pouring their water, for the rest of my life. They were so very wrong. When I was 16 years old, I spent 6 solid months breathing life into my very first short documentary. It was a rugged, fiercely loved, and highly imperfect piece of work shot on a borrowed school camcorder that weighed a ton and chewed through expensive tapes. I spent countless afternoons hidden away in the windowless editing bay of my high school media center, splicing audio clips, adjusting the harsh lighting of my amateur footage, and slowly learning how to make a sequence of moving images evoke a genuine, visceral feeling. It was the absolute hardest I had ever worked on anything in my short life, and remarkably, it paid off. The film was selected for the Southeast Regional Student Film Festival, and a few weeks later, I received a thick manila envelope in the mail notifying me that I had won the grand prize for student documentary storytelling. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the letter with trembling hands. For a brief, painfully naive moment, I thought this would be the thing that finally made me visible to the people who shared my last name. My mother, standing by the marble island reviewing floral invoices for an upcoming country club gala, barely looked up from her paperwork, but she did make a solid promise. "We will be right there in the second row. Piper," Elise had said, tapping her gold pen against her leather planner. "Right in the center," my father had chimed in from the hallway, offering that gentle, reassuring tone he always utilized to smooth over the sharp edges of my mother's perpetual distraction. "Absolutely, sweetheart," Warren said, offering a warm smile. "We will head over right after lunch." We would not miss it for the world. The screening was held on a Saturday in a cavernous, slightly damp community theater downtown. The air inside smelled faintly of old velvet and industrial floor wax. I arrived 3 hours early just to test the audio levels and make sure the projection was aligned perfectly. As the auditorium slowly began to fill with other nervous students, proud parents clutching bouquets of grocery store flowers, and local arts journalists, I kept my eyes fixed entirely on the heavy oak doors at the back of the room. I saved 3 seats in the second row, exactly as my mother had requested. I placed my denim jacket over one chair, my heavy backpack over another, and guarded the third with my own body. The overhead lights dimmed. The projector hummed to life with a mechanical click. The opening title card of my film splashed across the massive white screen. I looked over my shoulder one last time. The heavy oak doors remained completely shut. My documentary played for 22 minutes. For 22 minutes, I did not watch the screen. I did not listen to the dialogue I had meticulously edited. I watched the glowing red exit sign, desperately waiting for the familiar silhouettes of my family to slip inside and hurry down the aisle. They never did. When the lights came back up and the polite applause rippled through the room, the 3 seats beside me were still completely empty. The only person who stood by my side that evening was Mrs. Hayes, the faculty advisor for the media club. She was a tired, fiercely dedicated woman who easily recognized a lonely kid when she saw one. When my name was called to accept the heavy glass award, I walked up the carpeted stairs to the stage entirely alone. Mrs. Hayes stood at the very edge of the aisle, holding a cheap disposable camera. She snapped a photo just as I held the trophy against my chest. Years later, when I finally developed that roll of film, the framing of the picture told the entire story better than I ever could. There I was, bathed in the harsh glare of the stage lights, smiling a brittle, devastated smile, and right behind me, perfectly in focus, was the second row, 3 empty chairs, waiting for people who were never going to arrive. I took the city bus home that night. The glass award felt like a block of lead resting in my lap. When I walked through the front door, the sprawling house was entirely dark except for the warm, yellow glow spilling from the kitchen. My mother was standing at the counter, carefully running a handheld steamer over a sequined sash. Sloan had a showcase for a local teen pageant that evening. It was not even an actual competition with judges. It was simply a rehearsal dinner masquerading as a talent showcase for the sponsors. But Sloan required an audience, and Elise had unilaterally determined that my sister's manufactured spotlight was completely non-negotiable. "You have to understand, Piper," Elise said, not even pausing the steady hissing steam when I walked into the room holding my award. "An on-stage opportunity is simply more important than a short film screening in the dark. We will watch your little video on the computer tomorrow." Sloan needed us there to check her stage presence and make sure the lighting caught her dress. She did not say she was sorry. She did not ask if I was proud of myself or what it felt like to hear the applause. She stated it as a universal, indisputable fact of physics. Sloane's rehearsal was a major event, and my 6 months of agonizing, passionate work was merely a minor scheduling conflict. My father was sitting at the kitchen table, nursing a cup of decaffeinated coffee. He looked at the heavy glass trophy in my hands, and I saw the flash of genuine guilt cross his features. His shoulders slumped, and he opened his mouth, perhaps to offer an apology, perhaps to tell me he was proud of my achievement. But Elise shot him a sharp, warning glance across the room, signaling that the conversation was officially over. Warren closed his mouth, looked down at his mug, and offered me that same sad, useless smile. He chose the quiet peace of his household over the broken heart of his eldest daughter. He proved, once and for all, that his silence was never a form of neutrality. His silence was active participation in my erasure. I did not argue. I did not scream or throw the trophy. I just took my award, walked upstairs, and set it quietly on my desk. A few months later, it vanished. I assumed my mother had packed it away while cleaning my room for a holiday party. I did not ask about it. I had already learned the hard way that pressing them for answers only resulted in being labeled overly sensitive or dramatic. 4 years later, during my sophomore year of college, I came home for the summer and needed to find a specific extension cord in the garage. I dug through the dusty, overflowing storage racks. Tucked all the way in the back corner, sitting directly on the stained concrete floor, was a battered cardboard box. It was wedged tightly underneath a massive plastic tub, labeled with Sloane's name, packed to the brim with her seasonal pageant decorations, discarded tiaras, and velvet sashes. Piled on top of that tub were 3 heavy rolls of custom vinyl backdrops from Velvet Lane celebrations. And there, crushed beneath the literal weight of my sister's discarded vanity and my mother's corporate excess, was my glass trophy. It was chipped on the left corner and coated in a thick gray layer of garage dust. They had not just put it away to tidy up the house, they had buried it. I sat on the cold concrete floor of the garage, holding that chipped piece of glass, and something fundamental inside my chest finally snapped shut. I realized I was fighting a war I had already lost the day I was born. You cannot force people to look at you if they have already decided you are invisible. From that afternoon onward, I never stopped creating, but I absolutely stopped waiting for them to watch. I took my camera and turned it outward. I started accepting freelance jobs, editing promotional videos for local businesses, cutting together highlight reels for athletes, and eventually shaping documentaries for people who actually wanted their stories told. I became a master at framing the complex lives of strangers precisely because I had completely surrendered the idea of my own family ever seeing mine. I boxed up my own narrative, taped it shut, and shoved it into the dark. I would be the storyteller, never the subject. It is crucial to understand this specific history, because when the day of my wedding finally arrived, and the rows of wooden chairs sat completely empty under the apple trees, it was not a sudden, shocking betrayal. It was not a bizarre misunderstanding or a tragic clash of busy schedules. It was simply the grand finale of a performance they had been rehearsing for decades. The knife did not suddenly slip on my wedding day. The pain had been sitting just beneath my skin since I was 16 years old, and my family finally decided to press on it with all their weight. The air inside the abandoned Asheville train station tasted like pulverized brick and decades of undisturbed dust. I was standing on a precarious scaffold, balancing my heavy camera on my shoulder to capture the afternoon light filtering through the shattered skylights. I was shooting environmental footage for a local historical society documentary, completely absorbed in finding the perfect focal length, when I almost dropped my lens cap directly onto the head of a man standing 10 feet below me. "Careful up there," a voice called out, deep and resonant, cutting through the silence of the massive room. I looked down. That was the exact moment I met Jonah Vale. He was not wearing a hard hat, but he had the quiet, steady stance of someone who inherently belonged on a construction site. He wore faded denim jeans, heavy leather work boots, and a plain gray cotton shirt. When I climbed down the scaffolding to apologize, He introduced himself simply as someone working in hospitality operations, checking the structural bones of the building for a potential revitalization project. Later, when we walked out to the gravel lot together, I noticed he drove a beat-up old Ford truck that rattled aggressively when he turned the ignition. From our very first conversation, Jonah possessed a rare quality I had never encountered before in my entire life. He had an extraordinary capacity for stillness. When you grow up in a house where every conversation is a high-volume competition for oxygen, you learn to equate love with performance. You learn that if you are not entertaining or useful, you are invisible. Jonah was the absolute opposite. He did not require me to perform. He did not ask me to shrink myself down to make him feel larger. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, asking me questions about my camera angles and actually waiting to hear the answers. Our dating life evolved with a slow, deliberate rhythm. We met for late-night coffees after I finished agonizing over a stubborn video timeline for a demanding client. We took long, winding drives up into the Blue Ridge Mountains on Sunday mornings. The windows rolled down, listening to the wind instead of trying to fill every inch of silence with nervous chatter. Our conversations were entirely devoid of strategy. Nobody was trying to be the smartest person in the room. Nobody was treating a simple dinner like a networking opportunity or a brand pitch. But the defining moment, the exact second I knew I was in irreversible trouble with this man, happened 3 months into our relationship. I had cautiously let him watch one of my recent documentaries. Most people watch my work with a polite, glassy stare, waiting for the end credits so they can offer a generic, meaningless compliment. Jonah sat on my worn velvet couch, leaning forward, his eyes tracking every single frame. When the screen went dark, he did not just say it was nice. He looked at me and asked why I chose to let the ambient street noise bleed into the dialogue during the third act. He mentioned a specific 2-second cut of a woman's hands resting nervously in her lap, pointing out how it completely shifted the emotional weight of the scene. He remembered the exact color grading I used in the opening sequence. He saw the microscopic details I obsessed over at 2 a.m, the things I firmly believed no one else would ever notice. He saw my work. He saw me. I knew, of course, that Jonah was not just a guy checking floorboards for a mid-level property management company. He never lied to me. A few weeks into dating, as we sat on the tailgate of his rattling Ford eating takeout noodles, he casually explained what he actually did for a living. Jonah Vail was the founder and chief executive officer of North Spire Hospitality. He ran a massive private equity group that specialized in quietly acquiring, restructuring, and operating luxury wedding and resort properties that were crumbling under the weight of financial mismanagement. He was a man who held the power to make or break entire companies in the luxury event sphere. He just preferred the faded gray shirt to the custom suit. He did not hide his identity from me. He simply did not want to be treated like a walking bank account by the rest of the world. He wanted to know people liked him for his company, not his portfolio. When he told me, my first instinct was profound relief. I immediately agreed to keep his professional stature completely hidden. I did not care about the money or the corporate leverage. I cared about protecting him. For the first time in my 32 years on Earth, I had found a beautiful, solid relationship, and I was absolutely terrified of what would happen if my family got their hands on it. If Elise and Rhett discovered who Jonah really was, they would not see a man who loved me. They would see a vendor contract. They would see an investor. They would see a strategic alliance. They would instantly strip him down for parts. I wanted one single thing in my life that could not be monetized by the Galloway family. 2 years after we met in that dusty train station, Jonah brought me back there. The Historical Society had secured their funding, the roof had been repaired, and the floorboards were swept clean, though the space was still beautifully raw. It was a Tuesday evening in late October. He told me he wanted to show me something about the lighting for the final phase of the project. When I walked through the heavy wooden doors, the cavernous room was completely dark. Save for a single beam of light cutting through the center, Jonah had set up a vintage film projector. He had quietly reached out to my old high school media teacher, Mrs. Hayes, He had tracked down the digital file of the very first short documentary I ever made, the one that won the regional prize when I was 16. I stood there in the dark, shivering in my coat, watching my teenage self's raw, messy footage flicker against the exposed brick wall. I watched the film my family had abandoned. I watched the story I had buried under a plastic tub of pageant decorations. Jonah stood right beside me, his shoulder pressed gently against mine, his eyes fixed on the wall. He did not say a word until the 22 minutes were over and the screen went black. Then, he turned to me in the quiet dark. There were no hidden photographers waiting to jump out from behind a pillar. There was no drone hovering above us to capture the moment for social media engagement. There was no audience to applaud. It was just the two of us, standing in a place we were slowly bringing back to life. Jonah reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple, unadorned gold ring. He did not offer a rehearsed monologue or a grand, sweeping declaration meant for public consumption. He simply looked at me, his voice steady and low in the cavernous room. "I want to watch everything you ever make, Piper," he said. "I want to be the one sitting in the seat right next to you, for all of it. Will you marry me?" I did not cry gracefully. I sobbed into his shoulder, nodding yes against the fabric of his jacket. As he slipped the ring onto my finger, a fierce, overwhelming realization washed over me. This was mine. This quiet, brilliant man. This ring. This entirely private, unrecorded moment in the dark. It belonged completely to me. It was not a stage set for my sister to twirl on. It was not a networking opportunity for my parents to exploit. It was a real, tangible milestone that no one in my family could corrupt or steal. I finally had a front row, and Jonah was the only person I wanted sitting in it. I just had to figure out how to navigate the absolute wreckage of telling the rest of my family that I was getting married, while desperately keeping them in the dark about who, exactly, I was marrying. I naively believed that if I kept the wedding small, simple, and entirely focused on us, I could avoid their usual theatrics. I thought I could build a tiny safe island away from their demands. I did not realize that building an island just makes it easier for everyone else to abandon you on it. The red rocks of Sedona, Arizona, are breathtakingly ancient, radiating a profound, silent heat that makes you feel incredibly small. My sister, however, simply looked at those majestic geological formations and saw a highly optimized background for her sagging social media metrics. Sloane's follower engagement had been steadily dropping for 6 months. Her meticulously curated beige lifestyle brand was growing stale, and nothing terrifies a professional influencer more than becoming irrelevant to the algorithm. Her 5th wedding anniversary provided the ultimate loophole. She announced a spiritual renewal weekend in the desert to refresh her marriage image, rebrand her aesthetic, and most importantly, generate a massive wave of sponsored content. Naturally, my mother treated this manufactured milestone like a royal coronation. Elise transformed a transparent publicity stunt into a mandatory national-level family event. She mobilized the entire Galloway bloodline with the ruthless efficiency of a military general. 23 relatives boarded flights from all over the United States, descending upon the desert like a flock of perfectly dressed migratory birds. The dress code was strictly enforced on the invitation's sand and champagne tones only, to ensure no one clashed with the natural environment or Sloane's custom silk gown. Jonah and I paid for our own commercial flights. We booked a standard room at a modest hotel located 20 minutes away from the sprawling, exclusive resort where Elise had rented luxury villas for the core family members. I could have easily declined the invitation. I had a dozen valid excuses ready, from looming editing deadlines to simple financial constraints, but I went anyway. I packed my sand-colored linen dress and boarded the plane because some fragile, stubborn part of my heart refused to be the first one to sever the tie. I was still desperately trying to prove that I was a supportive sister, even as the evidence mounted that no one would ever return the favor. The entire weekend was an exercise in exhausting, high-end choreography. There were no spontaneous moments of familial joy. Every hug, every laugh, and every clinking glass was heavily directed. A hired crew flew a buzzing drone overhead to capture sweeping aerial footage of our coordinated outfits against the dramatic canyon drops. We were marched to the edge of cliffs at golden hour and instructed to look off into the distance, smiling at absolutely nothing, while photographers snapped hundreds of synchronized pictures. It was cold, sharp, and entirely synthetic, wrapped in a shimmering veneer of wealthy southern charm. The main dinner on Saturday night was the absolute peak of the absurdity. Elise had rented out a private terrace overlooking the valley. Thousands of warm yellow string lights were draped above us, casting a cinematic glow over the massive banquet table covered in imported white floral arrangements. I was seated near the end of the table, exactly where I expected to be. Jonah sat beside me, looking devastatingly handsome in a simple beige button-down shirt that technically fit the dress code, but entirely lacked the pretentious flair of the other men. Throughout the first two courses, my mother actively avoided making eye contact with him, save for one brief moment when she handed him an empty water carafe and asked if he could find a waiter to refill it. She spoke to him with the distinct, polite dismissal reserved for a nameless mid-level employee. Rhett, heavily intoxicated by his own perceived success and 3 glasses of expensive red wine, eventually leaned his elbows on the table and locked his sights on Jonah. "So, Jonah," Rhett said loudly, ensuring the conversation halted around them. "Elise mentioned you are in the hospitality sector. What exactly is your daily grind? You do accommodation coordination, or just closing bookings for a management group?" The sheer condescension in his voice was thick enough to choke on. He was looking at a man who could legally acquire his entire corporate portfolio before breakfast, and treating him like a junior ticketing agent. Jonah did not flinch. He did not puff out his chest. He took a slow sip of his water, set the glass down, and offered Rhett a calm, completely unbothered smile. "I keep things running," Jonah said smoothly. "I make sure the right properties have the right resources. Right, the operational grunt work," Rhett chuckled, waving his hand dismissively. "It is a tough racket. Man, you really have to have the vision to scale. Take Stonehaven House, for example. We are currently finalizing a massive expansion plan. We are moving into 3 new states by the end of the fiscal year. It takes aggressive capital, but that is the game." Rhett proceeded to monologue for 15 unbroken minutes about his aggressive business strategies, his profit margins, and his unparalleled genius in the wedding industry. He was completely oblivious to the fact that his company was currently bleeding money and generating terrible vendor reviews. Jonah just sat there, listening attentively, nodding at the appropriate intervals, and letting Rhett dig his own arrogant grave. Jonah possessed the serene, untouchable patience of a man who knew exactly how the story was going to end. I reached under the table and placed my hand over Jonah's. He laced his fingers through mine, squeezing gently to let me know he was perfectly fine. He was not insulted, he was amused. As the dessert plates were cleared, Elise stood up and tapped her crystal champagne flute with a silver spoon. The 23 assembled relatives fell silent, turning their adoring faces toward the matriarch. Elise raised her glass toward Sloane and Rhett, her eyes shining with practiced, camera-ready tears. She spoke about enduring love, about the strength of family bonds, and about the beautiful legacy they were building together. "People in my industry often ask me why I would go to such extreme lengths to organize an event like this," Elise announced, her voice echoing perfectly off the canyon walls as the designated videographer circled her. "They ask why I would spend tens of thousands of dollars on a single weekend in the desert." She paused, placing a hand dramatically over her heart. "I tell them it is never an expense," Elise declared, looking around the table at her captive audience. "It is an investment in family memories. Because at the end of the day, showing up for the people you love is the only thing that truly matters." The table erupted in applause. Sloane wiped a delicate, perfectly preserved tear from her cheek. Rhett raised his glass high in the air. I sat frozen in my chair, staring at the glowing yellow lights above me, feeling a cold, hollow sensation carve out the center of my chest. At that exact moment, my mind drifted 2,000 miles away. back to my quiet apartment in Asheville. Sitting on my desk was a stack of returned mail. 45 days ago, I had mailed out the save the dates for my own wedding. They were elegant, understated, and intensely personal. I had sent them to every single person currently sitting at this extravagant table. As of that night in Sedona, those thick paper envelopes were sitting undisturbed on 23 different refrigerators and office desks. Not one single person had RSVP'd. Not one. I was sitting at a table watching my family toast to the concept of showing up, while my own invitation to join my life was being universally ignored. I looked at my aunt, who had flown in from Florida. I looked at my cousins, who had driven 10 hours from Texas. I looked at my parents, who had orchestrated this entire logistical marvel just to ensure Sloan had the perfect backdrop for her brand sponsorships. For years, whenever I was pushed to the side, I had fed myself a comforting lie. I told myself they were simply overwhelmed. I rationalized that running high-end businesses took a toll, that my mother was chronically stressed, that my father was exhausted, and that they simply lacked the bandwidth to show up for my smaller, quieter life. I convinced myself they were just too busy. Looking around that desert terrace, the lie finally evaporated. The truth was glaring, undeniable, and sharp as shattered glass. They were not busy. They were not tired. They possessed an absolute abundance of time, energy, and financial resources. They were capable of moving mountains, crossing time zones, and spending tens of thousands of dollars on a whim. They were incredibly energetic and passionately devoted, but only when the chosen recipient was Sloan. I looked at Jonah. He was already looking at me, his dark eyes filled with a quiet, profound understanding. He saw the exact moment the final string snapped inside me. I did not cause a scene. I did not throw my champagne in Rhett's face or demand my mother explain her hypocrisy. I just raised my glass, smiled a cold, dead smile for the camera panning past our section of the table, and took a drink. I was completely done being the girl by the kitchen door. I selected Cedar Hollow Orchard for the ceremony. It sat perched on a rolling hill just outside Asheville, offering a sweeping view of the Blue Ridge valleys and endless rows of heirloom apple trees. The air there smelled like crushed leaves and sweet cedar wood. The venue was intimate, grounded, and entirely unpretentious. Most importantly, it was located less than a 2-hour drive straight down the interstate from my parents' sprawling estate in Greenville. It was a straight shot. No flights required, no layovers. When it came time to send out the formal invitations, I designed every single piece myself. I sourced heavy, raw cotton paper and used a vintage letterpress to imprint the details in a deep, mossy green ink. There was no gold foil, no embossed crests, and no aggressively formal calligraphy demanding attention. When I showed the mock-ups to Jonah, he ran his thumb over the textured paper and smiled. "Make it look like you," Jonah had said, his voice quiet and certain. "That is the only thing I care about." I poured my heart into those envelopes, carefully sealing them with wax and dropping them into the mail. Then, the waiting began. A wedding RSVP is a strange, loaded piece of mail. It is a physical contract of care. As the weeks ticked closer to the deadline, my mailbox remained stubbornly empty of any return envelopes bearing the Greenville postmark. The deadline arrived, hovered for a day, and quietly expired. I stared at my meticulously organized spreadsheet. Jonah's side was completely filled out, a solid column of joyous acceptances. My side was a barren wasteland of blank spaces. I was forced into the humiliating position of having to pick up the phone and chase down my own flesh and blood to ask if they planned on attending my wedding. I called my mother first. Elise answered on the 4th ring. Her voice clipped and distant, the sound of a rustling seating chart for some upcoming charity gala clearly audible in the background. When I gently reminded her about the RSVP deadline, she let out a long, theatrical sigh. "Oh, Piper, honestly," Elise breathed, sounding profoundly put out. "I am simply exhausted after the Sedona trip. Coordinating all those logistics took a massive toll on me. A 2-hour drive up the mountain right now just feels like climbing Mount Everest." We will send a lovely gift, of course. I swallowed the heavy lump in my throat and hung up. I called my father next. Warren answered from his study. When I asked if he was coming to walk me down the aisle, he cleared his throat nervously. The sound of a man desperately looking for an exit. "Sweetheart, let us not force things to be awkward," Warren murmured, his tone laced with that familiar, cowardly gentle timbre. "Your mother is very stressed right now, and if I go, it will just create tension in the house. You understand how it is. We want you to be happy." He wanted me to be happy as long as it required absolutely zero effort or backbone on his part. Sloane did not even afford me the basic dignity of a phone call. She sent a text message late on a Tuesday night. It read that she had a major brand shoot scheduled for that specific weekend. The light in the studio was already paid for, and she simply could not move the dates. My aunts and uncles, the very same people who had happily boarded planes and flown across 15 different states to drink free champagne in the desert a month prior, suddenly developed a severe aversion to travel. They claimed the highway traffic would be too heavy or the mountain roads too winding. The excuses piled up, flimsy and transparent, building a suffocating wall of rejection around me. Exactly 10 days before I was set to walk down the aisle, my phone rang. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I answered, a pathetic spark of hope still flickering in my chest that perhaps she had changed her mind. Perhaps the reality of missing her oldest daughter's wedding had finally pierced her armor. "Piper," Elise said sharply, skipping any form of greeting. "I have been hearing whispers from your aunt that you are upset about the head count. I am calling to put an end to this narrative." Something inside me went frighteningly still. Without thinking, operating on pure, self-preserving instinct, I pressed the record button on my phone screen. "I am not creating a narrative, Mom," I replied, my voice remarkably steady. "I am just getting married. And none of you are coming. Do not turn a small ceremony into a loyalty test," Elise snapped, her words landing like physical blows. "You chose a quiet little orchard. You knew we were recovering from Sloane's big weekend. You cannot expect the entire family to drop their lives and rush up there just because you finally decided to settle down. It is incredibly selfish of you to play the victim here." She hung up. I sat on my living room floor, staring at the digital audio file saved on my screen. That file contained the exact measurement of my worth to Elise Galloway. The morning of my wedding was impossibly beautiful. The sky over Cedar Hollow Orchard was a piercing, cloudless blue, and the autumn air was crisp and bright. But the physical reality of the ceremony space was a jarring, asymmetrical portrait of my life. Jonah's side of the aisle was packed, warm, and vibrating with genuine joy. His mother sat in the front row, beaming. His old college friends, his longtime business associates who had flown in from the coast, and his extended relatives filled every single wooden chair. They were laughing, chatting, and looking toward the altar with eager anticipation. My side of the aisle was a ghost town. Out of the dozens of chairs set up on the left side of the grass, exactly 5 were occupied. Lena, my fierce and loyal best friend, sat in the front row. Behind her sat 2 of my closest friends from university, and behind them, a lovely older couple who were former clients of mine, people who had deeply appreciated a documentary I made about their small business years ago. That was it. 5 people. Behind them stretched rows and rows of gleaming, empty wooden chairs, sitting silently under the apple branches. 30 minutes before the acoustic music was set to begin, the venue coordinator, a sweet woman with a clipboard and a panicked expression, pulled me aside. She gestured nervously toward the glaring, empty space. "Piper, honey," the coordinator whispered gently, "we have a bit of a visual imbalance out there. Would you like my team to quickly remove the extra chairs on your side? We can shift the remaining seats closer to the center, or space them out so it does not look so bare. We can hide the gap." I looked out the window of the bridal suite at the rows of empty seats. My entire life, I had been the one shifting the furniture to make my family look better. I had been the one absorbing the awkwardness, hiding the neglect, and smoothing over the uncomfortable truths to protect their public image. If they did not show up, I was supposed to pretend I never invited them in the first place. "No," I said, my voice ringing clear and absolute in the quiet room. "Leave every single chair exactly where it is." "Are you sure?" she asked, clearly worried about the photographs. "I am absolutely sure. Do not move a thing." I wanted the empty space. I needed the visual evidence. I refused to paint over their absence to make the picture more palatable for anyone else. When the guitar began to play my cue, I stepped out into the crisp mountain air. I did not have my father to link his arm through mine. I walked myself down the aisle. As I placed one foot in front of the other, moving across the grass, I passed the empty rows on my left. I looked at the polished wood of the chairs shining in the sun. I felt the physical weight of the air where my mother should have been, where my sister should have sat, where my aunts and uncles should have been smiling. But as I kept walking, moving closer to Jonah, who was standing at the end of the aisle looking at me like I was the only person on the planet, the crushing weight in my chest began to lift. The sharp, stinging pain of rejection slowly morphed into a strange, profound clarity. Passing those empty chairs, I finally understood the truth. This wedding did not cost me my family. It simply illuminated a fact that had been sitting in the dark for 32 years. I was not losing them today. I had never really had them to begin with. And as I reached the end of the aisle and took Jonah's hands in mine, I realized that for the first time in my life, I was standing exactly where I belonged. Exactly 3 days after I stood under the apple trees and married the love of my life. The Galloway family group chat flared back to life. My phone screen lit up on my editing desk, vibrating with a rapid succession of incoming messages. For a brief, irrational fraction of a second, a phantom reflex in my chest anticipated a delayed wave of apologies. I thought perhaps the gravity of their collective absence had finally settled over them. I was, of course, entirely wrong. The messages were aggressively casual. My aunt asked if anyone had a good recipe for sweet potato casserole. Sloane sent a brightly filtered photo of her new manicured nails clutching a branded iced coffee. And then, my mother chimed in. "Hope the rustic little mountain thing went smoothly." "Piper," Elise wrote, "did the weather hold up for you guys?" There was no phone call. There was no handwritten card. There was not a single, genuine articulation of regret for missing the day I said my vows. They had simply bypassed the event entirely, neatly stepping over my wedding as if it were a minor puddle on the sidewalk. They expected me to fall right back into my designated role as the compliant, invisible daughter who absorbed their indifference without making a fuss. I did not reply. Instead, I moved my mouse across my computer screen, right-clicked on the desktop, and created a new master folder. I typed the word mileage into the title bar and hit enter. I am a documentary editor. My entire professional existence revolves around taking massive, chaotic amounts of raw data and organizing it into a coherent, undeniable narrative. I know how to log footage. I know how to establish a timeline. I realized that my family's greatest weapon had always been their ability to rewrite history. They would let time pass, smooth over the rough edges with expensive dinners and forced smiles, and eventually gaslight me into believing I had overreacted. I decided that was never going to happen again. I opened the mileage folder and began dragging files into it. I dropped in the digital spreadsheet showing 23 blank spaces where their acceptances should have been. I imported the audio file of the phone call where my mother accused me of setting a loyalty test. I uploaded the high-resolution photograph Lena had taken from the front row, capturing my 5 guests sitting in a sea of dozens of gleaming, empty wooden chairs. Then, I opened a digital mapping application. I typed in the address of my parents' estate in Greenville and the address of Cedar Hollow Orchard. The screen generated a clean blue line tracing the route up the interstate. 1 hour and 48 minutes. I took a screenshot and dropped it into the folder. I cleared the search bar and typed in the coordinates for the luxury resort in Sedona, Arizona. The application calculated the distance. 1,874 miles. I took another screenshot and placed it right next to the first one. Lena Carver, my fiercely protective best friend, was sitting on my sofa reviewing contracts for her commercial litigation firm while I organized the files. She walked over, leaning against my desk to look at the screen. "You are building a case file," Lena noted, her voice flat and professional. "I just need to keep it," I replied, staring at the side-by-side maps. "I need to know I am not crazy." "You are not crazy," Lena said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Keep every single piece of it. Do not keep it because you want to burn them down for sport. Keep it because the next time your mother tries to tell you that you are misremembering things, or that they simply could not make the logistics work, you can open this folder and look at the cold, hard data. You are building an insurance policy against their gaslighting." While I was meticulously preserving the truth in Asheville, the flawless, heavily curated facade of the Galloway Empire down in Greenville was quietly beginning to fracture. I still received industry newsletters and remained in private social media groups for wedding professionals across the Southeast. Slowly, the whispers started filtering through the network. A prominent floral designer posted a vaguely worded but furious warning about a high-end event planner in South Carolina who was suddenly 90 days late on a massive invoice. It was Velvet Lane Celebrations. My mother's company was dodging calls from the very vendors she relied upon to build her extravagant alternate realities. The situation with Rhett was exponentially worse. Stonehaven House Collection was bleeding out in public. Brides were flocking to online review boards, devastated and screaming about last-minute venue cancellations due to mysterious permitting issues. Rhett was refusing to refund their heavy security deposits, citing obscure force majeure clauses in his contracts. He had expanded far too aggressively, leveraging properties he did not actually own to acquire more debt, and the entire house of cards was trembling under the weight of his towering arrogance. Through a slip of the tongue from a gossiping aunt who called to complain about the economy, I learned exactly how the family was keeping the lights on. My father had quietly gone to a private lender and taken out a massive second mortgage on the Greenville estate. Warren was systematically draining his own equity to artificially prop up my mother's sinking company and to provide desperate, short-term bridge loans to keep Rhett out of immediate litigation. Warren was doing what he had done his entire life. He was throwing money and silence at a catastrophic problem, desperately hoping that if no one acknowledged the rot, the structure would somehow hold. He was sacrificing his own foundation to maintain their illusions. In the past, this was the exact moment I would have stepped in. I would have drafted a crisis communications strategy for Rhett. I would have offered to shoot a beautiful, reassuring promotional campaign for Velvet Lane for absolutely $0. I would have acted as the invisible, weightless bridge, allowing them to walk over me to get to safety. This time, I closed my laptop. I did not send a text message. I did not offer a single word of warning. I let the silence stretch out, heavy and absolute. For the very first time in my existence, I let them suffer the natural consequences of their own reckless choices. A few days later, Jonah was sitting at our kitchen island, drinking black coffee and scrolling through a secure financial terminal on his tablet. The morning light caught the gold band on his left hand. "The trades are going to pick it up by tomorrow," Jonah mentioned casually, not looking up from the screen. "Pick up what?" I asked, pouring myself a mug. "North Spire is officially announcing the new regional strategy," he explained, tapping the screen to highlight a press release draft. "We are launching a specialized acquisition fund targeting distressed hospitality and event venues across the Southeast. We are going to buy out the sinking ships, clear out the incompetent management, and stabilize the properties. Simultaneously, we are releasing the new National Preferred Vendor List. If a vendor is on that list, they get exclusive, priority booking rights across every single property in the North Spire portfolio." I stopped pouring my coffee. I set the glass pot down on the counter very slowly. I understood the mechanics of the industry perfectly. To a struggling event planner drowning in unpaid invoices, landing on the North Spire preferred vendor list was a literal winning lottery ticket. It meant guaranteed, high budget, consistent work for years to come. To an over-leveraged, Failing venue owner like Rhett, the North Spire acquisition program was the only lifeline that could possibly save him from total bankruptcy and public ruin. I looked at my husband, the quiet, brilliant man who liked to fix broken things, and a chilling realization washed over me. My family had absolutely no idea who he was. They had looked right at the architect of their potential salvation in Sedona and treated him like a dim-witted bellhop. If Elise and Rhett suddenly discovered the true identity of the man I had just married, the narrative would violently shift. The silent group chats and the empty wedding chairs would vanish. They would be replaced by an immediate, suffocating tidal wave of manufactured affection. They would suddenly remember how much they adored me. They would craft elaborate, tearful apologies. They would try to leverage my marriage to save their crumbling empires, packaging their financial desperation as a heartwarming family reconciliation. They would try to turn my husband into their exit strategy. I walked over to Jonah, wrapped my arms around his shoulders from behind, and pressed my face against the warm cotton of his shirt. He leaned his head back against mine, a silent anchor in the approaching storm. I closed my eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. Let the press release go out. I thought, let them read the name at the top of the executive summary. I was no longer the frightened girl sitting by the kitchen door. I had my evidence, I had my husband, and I was entirely prepared to watch the Galloway family collide with the absolute truth. The broker sent Rhett the standard North Spire leadership and acquisition deck on a Thursday afternoon. Rhett was most likely sitting in his overly air-conditioned corporate office, sweating through his custom-tailored shirt, praying for a financial miracle to save his crumbling venues. He opened the digital file. He scrolled past the corporate mission statement, past the regional investment maps, and landed directly on the executive team profile page. Staring back at him, wearing a sharp navy suit, but possessing the exact same calm, unbothered eyes from the Sedona dinner table, was Jonah Vale, founder and chief executive officer. The man Rhett had publicly mocked for doing basic accommodation coordination was holding the absolute power of life and death over the entire Stonehaven House collection. Within 2 hours, the sheer panic had undoubtedly infected the rest of the Galloway empire. Rhett would have called Sloane, his voice cracking with terror. Sloane would have immediately called our mother. Elise, operating with the ruthless, terrifying efficiency of a woman watching her entire social and financial standing evaporate, would have deployed her high-end industry contacts to run a comprehensive background check on my new husband. She would have seen the massive corporate portfolio. She would have seen the staggering net worth. She would have seen the newly announced acquisition fund specifically targeting businesses exactly like hers and Rhett's. And then, Warren would have looked at the terrifying math of his second mortgage and realized that the daughter he abandoned at the altar was currently sleeping next to the only man in North America who could save them from total ruin. The fallout hit my phone exactly at 6 in the morning on a Saturday. It started with a single, aggressive vibration against the wood of my nightstand, then a second, then a third. Within 10 seconds, the device was shaking so violently it nearly rattled off the edge of the table. I sat up in the dim morning light, pulling the heavy covers to my chest, and watched the screen light up with a relentless, blinding stream of notifications. Missed call from Elise, missed call from Sloane, text from Rhett, voicemail from Aunt Clara, 2 emails from my father, text from cousin Sarah, missed call from Elise again. By the time I fully woke up and unlocked the screen, I was staring at over 120 unread messages across 4 different platforms. The exact same people who could not manage to find a spare 2 hours to drive up the mountain and attend my wedding had suddenly found an infinite amount of time and energy to reach out to me. It was an emotional ambush, coordinated with military precision. I opened my mother's text thread first. "Piper, darling," Elise wrote, "I have been feeling just terrible about how rushed the last few weeks have been. We absolutely must get together for a beautiful lunch, just the 2 of us, so I can properly make it up to you. I also heard the most wonderful news about Jonah's company expanding. We really should discuss how Velvet Lane can synergize with his new ventures. Call me the absolute second you wake up. I swiped out and opened Sloane's message. "Hey, sister," Sloane typed, followed by 3 red heart emojis. "I feel so awful that my brand shoot ran late and I missed the big day. We need to take you and Jonah out to a 5-star dinner to properly congratulate you two. Red is so eager to catch up with him too. Let me know what your weekend looks like. I miss you so much." Red had bypassed my personal number entirely and found Jonah's professional email address, forwarding a copy to my inbox just to ensure it was seen by both of us. "Jonah, my man," the email began. "Incredible news about the North Spire expansion. I always knew you had a sharp, visionary eye for the industry when we chatted in Sedona. I would love to grab a bourbon, just us guys, and talk about some highly lucrative mutual opportunities with Stonehaven. Let me know when you are free to talk strategy." Then came the aunts and uncles. The same distant relatives who had complained about the terrible highway traffic and the exhausting drive were suddenly filling my inbox with sentimental garbage. They wrote long paragraphs about how family is absolutely everything, how blood is always thicker than water, and how we all needed to gather at the Greenville estate for a massive reunion dinner to celebrate my new marriage. I sat perfectly still on the edge of the bed, reading message after message. My chest did not ache. My eyes did not burn with tears. I simply felt an overwhelming, icy clarity wash over my entire body. There was a glaring, profound omission in the hundreds of frantic words they had typed into their glowing screens. Not a single person opened their message with a genuine apology. Not one of them started by saying they were sorry they missed my wedding day. They did not care that I got married. They only cared who I married. They all started their frantic overtures by mentioning Jonah, referencing his company, or praising his business acumen, and then they awkwardly pivoted back to me. I was simply the necessary, annoying toll bridge they had to cross to reach his capital. I was not a daughter or a beloved sister to them. I was a sudden, unexpected corporate asset. The only message that even brushed against the concept of genuine remorse came from my father. Warren had sent a long, rambling text at 4 a.m. "Piper, I am so incredibly sorry," Warren wrote. "I should have been there. I should have walked you down that aisle. I let the pressure of the house and your mother's stress cloud my judgment. I am so proud of the woman you are. Please let me see you. We are in a very difficult financial spot right now, and I really need my family together to get through this." 10 years ago, a message like that from my father would have completely broken my resolve. I would have driven straight to Greenville, crying the entire way, ready to forgive him for everything just to feel his warmth. But sitting in my quiet bedroom, looking at the timestamp of the text, the grand illusion was entirely shattered. It was a beautiful, heartbreaking apology, but it arrived at the exact moment his bank accounts were drying up, and he realized his new son-in-law held a massive acquisition fund. It was not born of regret for hurting me. It was born of sheer, unadulterated panic. The desperate timing turned his heartfelt words into nothing more than a calculated business transaction. Jonah walked into the bedroom carrying 2 heavy mugs of black coffee. He took one look at my glowing phone screen illuminating the dark room, then looked up at my face. He set the mugs down on the wooden dresser, walked over, and sat right beside me on the edge of the mattress. He did not ask what they said. He already knew. He could feel the desperate, frantic energy vibrating from the device in my hand. "You have the entire board in front of you," Jonah said softly, his voice acting as a steady anchor in the chaotic noise. "If you want me to leverage the company to teach them a brutal lesson, I will do it. If you want me to blacklist Stonehaven and Velvet Lane permanently from every property we own, I will make the calls right now. If you want to meet them for lunch and watch them beg for a bailout, I will drive you there and sit right beside you while they do it." He reached out and gently took the phone from my tight grip, turning the screen face down on the nightstand to kill the frantic light. "But I am not going to tell you what to do," he continued, looking directly into my eyes with absolute sincerity. "They have spent your entire life telling you how to act, how to feel, and how much space you are allowed to occupy. I will not add my voice to that noise. Whatever you decide to do with them, it has to be entirely your call. You keep your own power. He was giving me the one specific thing my family had actively denied me since the day I was born. He was giving me absolute agency. He was not trying to be the loud, aggressive savior swooping in to fight my battles to stroke his own ego. He was simply handing me the sword and stepping back to let me choose if I even wanted to swing it. I looked at the phone resting face down on the wood. The screen lit up again, casting a faint, desperate glow against the wall as another frantic call came through. I could easily picture the chaos unfolding in the Greenville estate right at that very moment. I could see Elise pacing the marble floors, barking demands into her headset. I could see Rhett sweating through his collar, refreshing his inbox every 10 seconds waiting for Jonah to reply. I could see Sloane biting her perfectly manicured nails, absolutely terrified of losing her aesthetic luxury lifestyle. They were cornered in a disaster of their own making, shouting my name and insisting that I rush into the chaos to help them. I drew in a long, steady breath. I reached out, picked up the phone, and swiped the notification away. I did not block their numbers. I did not send a fiery, dramatic reply condemning them for their hypocrisy. I did not answer a single message. I simply set the phone to silent, placed it back on the table, and walked out of the bedroom to drink my coffee. For 3 decades, my silence had always been a symptom of my pain. It was the quiet, suffocating space where I retreated when they pushed me away. It was a wound I licked in the dark, but that morning, the silence completely transformed. It was no longer a retreat. It was an offensive maneuver. It was a heavy, impenetrable wall that I had built myself, and I alone held the keys to the gate. I was finally choosing not to speak, and in that agonizing, beautiful quiet, I had never felt more powerful. 72 hours after the digital barrage began, the physical invasion commenced. I was sitting at my kitchen island on a Tuesday afternoon, reviewing raw audio tracks for a client, when a sharp, authoritative knock echoed through my apartment. I did not have any meetings scheduled. I walked over to the front door, peered through the peephole, and felt the temperature in my veins drop to absolute zero. Standing in the hallway of my modest Asheville building, looking entirely out of place in her tailored designer trench coat, was my mother. She was balancing an enormous cellophane-wrapped gift basket overflowing with imported cheeses, artisanal chocolates, and 2 bottles of outrageously expensive champagne. Tucked under her arm was a thick, white leather-bound album. Before I could even fully process the sheer audacity of her presence, my hand turned the deadbolt, and I pulled the door open. "Piper, my beautiful girl," Elise practically sang, her voice dripping with a sickly, artificial sweetness that made my stomach turn. She stepped forward, attempting to push past me into the entryway as if she owned the space. "Surprise, I know I should have called, but I just could not wait another second to squeeze you. I brought a few little treats, and I had my lab rush print a custom wedding album from the photos you posted online. It is simply stunning, darling." I did not step back. I planted my feet firmly on the threshold, using my body as a physical barrier. She collided gently with my shoulder, genuinely shocked that I was not clearing a path for her grand entrance. "Mom," I said, my voice dangerously flat. "What are you doing here?" Elise adjusted her grip on the massive basket, offering a practiced, mournful pout. "I came to see my daughter. The last few weeks have been a complete blur of logistical nightmares down in Greenville, and I simply hated the distance between us. Family has to stick together. Piper. Especially now, with so many exciting new developments." She did not even have the discipline to wait 3 full minutes before pivoting to the real objective. "Speaking of exciting," Elise continued, her eyes scanning the room over my shoulder, clearly looking for my husband. "I was reading the industry trades this morning. Jonah's new initiative with North Spire is absolutely brilliant. A preferred vendor program for the entire Southeast region is exactly the kind of disruptive synergy the market needs. I actually brought a few portfolios of Velvet Lane's recent premium events. I thought Jonah and I could sit down, have a glass of this champagne, and discuss the incredible opportunities for the whole family to collaborate." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, a woman who had ignored my wedding invitations, dismissed my career, and left me standing in front of an orchard of empty chairs. She was smiling at me as if I were a receptionist blocking her access to the chief executive officer. "You did not come here because you missed me," I said, my words slicing cleanly through the thick tension in the hallway. "You came because you finally ran a background check on my husband." Elise's perfectly painted mouth tightened into a thin, furious line, the sugary facade cracking for just a fraction of a second before she hastily glued it back together. "Piper, do not be dramatic. I am your mother. I am simply trying to support your new life." "You are not coming inside," I told her, holding her gaze until she was forced to look away. "Take the basket and drive back to Greenville." I closed the heavy wooden door, the click of the lock sounding like a gunshot in the quiet apartment. I stood there for 10 minutes, listening to the muffled sound of her angry footsteps retreating down the hall. The siege did not end with her retreat. Later that evening, my phone rang. It was Sloan. Against my better judgment, I answered. "You are being incredibly petty, Piper," Sloan hissed into the receiver, entirely skipping any form of greeting. "Mom drove 2 hours to bring you a gift, and you slammed the door in her face. You are acting like a child holding a grudge over a tiny scheduling conflict." "It was my wedding, Sloan," I replied calmly. "Well, some of us have actual responsibilities," she snapped, but then her voice hitched. The aggressive bravado suddenly shattered, replaced by the sound of ragged, genuine hyperventilation. "You do not understand what is happening down here. You never understand. Red is completely losing it. Stonehaven is drowning. Piper, we are 90 days behind on paying 3 of our biggest catering partners. 4 different brides are filing massive lawsuits this week to get their deposits back. We have absolutely no liquid cash left." She was sobbing now, the ugly, desperate tears of someone whose curated reality was entirely collapsing. "Rhett said Jonah has a distress fund," Sloan pleaded, her voice shrinking into something small and terrified. "He said Jonah buys failing venues. You have to talk to him. Piper, you are my sister. You have to save us." I listened to her cry, realizing that this was the first time in 32 years that Sloan Galloway had ever asked me for help without demanding it as a right. But I also realized she was only asking because she had exhausted every other option. "I cannot help you, Sloan," I said quietly, and ended the call. The following morning, Jonah sat next to me at the kitchen table, sliding his open laptop toward me. Rhett had officially submitted his investment deck to the North Spire Acquisitions portal. He had attached a personal email directly to Jonah, highlighting their mutual family bond and proposing a buyout that would be a massive win for both sides. I stared at the financial projections Rhett had confidently submitted. Even I, a documentary editor with no formal business degree, could spot the blatant, desperate fraud. Rhett had listed projected revenues of $5 million for the upcoming fiscal year, but half of the listed bookings were entirely fabricated. He had completely hidden over $1 million in outstanding vendor payables, masking them under vague operational expenses. He was trying to sell my husband a sinking ship painted gold. That afternoon, my father called. Warren did not yell. He did not cry. He utilized his signature weapon, quiet, agonizing guilt. "Piper," Warren sighed, sounding older than I had ever heard him, "please do not let this go too far. Do not punish the whole family to prove a point. I know your mother was wrong, but I had to sign cross guarantees on the family estate to secure short-term loans for Rhett and Elise. If Stonehaven and Velvet Lane go into default, the bank will take the house you grew up in. You hold the cards now. Do not be the person who pushes us over the edge." He spoke as if I were the one who had over-leveraged the businesses. He spoke as if I were the one who had chosen to gamble our family home on Rhett's ego. He was demanding that I absorb their massive failures, so he would not have to face the discomfort of holding his wife and son-in-law accountable. That night, lying in the dark while Jonah slept beside me, the heavy weight of my father's words pressed against my chest. A dangerous, familiar doubt began to creep into my mind. Was I being cruel? Was I tearing my own family apart just because my feelings had been wounded? A lifetime of conditioning is unbelievably hard to undo. I was completely used to exhausting myself just to keep them comfortable. I picked up my phone to check the time. There was a single unread message from Lena. She had been acting as my legal and emotional sounding board through the entire ordeal. "Look at this," Lena's message read. "Sloan was trying to forward a vendor contract to my firm for review, and she accidentally forwarded an entire text thread from your family's private group chat from 3 weeks ago. Read the highlighted bubble." I opened the attached image. It was a screenshot of a conversation between Elise, Sloan, and Rhett, dated exactly 5 days before my wedding. Elise had typed the message: "Do not let anyone waste a Saturday driving up to the mountain for Piper's little wedding. She chose a cheap venue on purpose so we would not have to be involved. She is always perfectly fine on her own. We need to focus 100% of our energy on the Stonehaven expansion launch. Piper will get over it. She always does." I read the words again, and then a third time. The cold, calculated dismissal. The absolute certainty that I was a minor inconvenience that could be easily ignored without consequence. The heavy, suffocating guilt completely evaporated from my chest, replaced by a crystalline, unbreakable resolve. They did not just neglect me by accident. They actively conspired to abandon me. 2 days later, a thick, premium envelope arrived in our mail. It was the official VIP invitation to the Southeastern Hospitality Summit, held annually in Atlanta. The printed card announced that North Spire Hospitality was the headline sponsor. The itinerary stated that Jonah Vail, Chief Executive Officer, would be delivering the keynote address and formally announcing the new regional acquisitions and the finalized national strategic partner list. I checked the public registration portal online. Elise had purchased a premium vendor table for Velvet Lane celebrations. Rhett had purchased 2 front-row investor tickets for Stonehaven House. They were spending money they absolutely did not possess to secure a seat in the room. They firmly believed that because they shared my last name, Jonah would step up to the podium and publicly throw them the life rafts they so desperately needed. They believed the summit was their ultimate salvation. I set the heavy invitation down on my desk, looking at the embossed gold lettering. They were walking blindly into a room full of industry press, wealthy investors, and furious vendors they had not paid in months. They were walking into the exact place where all the masks would finally fall, and this time, I would be sitting in the front row, watching the entire show. Jonah and I sat at the kitchen island on a quiet Thursday morning, the steam rising from our coffee mugs into the cold mountain air. The world outside our window was still and peaceful, a sharp contrast to the frantic, panicked energy radiating from Greenville. We had spent the previous night discussing exactly how we were going to handle the upcoming collision. We agreed on a singular, unbreakable rule for the days ahead. There would be no fabricated narratives, no empty threats, and absolutely no retaliatory abuse of his corporate power. We were not going to lower ourselves to their level of emotional manipulation. We would simply step aside, leave the stage entirely open, and allow the objective truth and their own professional incompetence to speak entirely for themselves. By Friday afternoon, the North Spire Compliance and Acquisitions team officially completed their rigorous evaluations of the new applicant pool. Jonah intentionally kept me entirely separated from the raw financial data to maintain a clean, ethical boundary. But the final executive summary was a matter of standard company record. The results were devastatingly clear. Stonehaven House Collection was flagged immediately and categorically rejected across the board. The corporate audit revealed severely unreliable booking metrics, noting that Rhett had artificially inflated his projected revenue by logging tentative inquiries as confirmed, paid events. Furthermore, he was carrying a massive, chronic load of debt owed to essential vendors, spanning back over 18 months. The absolute final nail in his professional coffin was a deeply buried citation regarding a severe fire safety violation at one of his flagship properties 2 years prior, an issue he had attempted to mask with temporary cosmetic repairs instead of permanent structural fixes. Velvet Lane celebrations fared absolutely no better in the assessment. My mother's supposedly elite, Flawless Event Planning Company was officially disqualified from the National Preferred Vendor Program. The compliance officers found a well-documented, embarrassing history of late payments to independent contractors. Even worse, they uncovered rampant, unauthorized copying of other designers' visual assets, alongside a complete lack of operational transparency in her billing practices. She was charging clients luxury prices while delivering corners cut at every possible turn. To ensure the absolute integrity of the evaluation process, Jonah implemented a strict, impenetrable legal firewall. He absolutely refused to put his personal signature anywhere near the rejection files for Velvet Lane or Stonehaven. He formally recused himself from their specific corporate evaluations, passing the final authorization directly to the Chief Operating Officer and the head of legal compliance. The rejections were processed exactly by the book, routed through the standard corporate protocols without a single drop of personal bias. If Rhett or Elise ever attempted to claim they were targeted out of petty spite, Jonah had the flawless, time-stamped paper trail to prove they simply failed to meet the basic, non-negotiable industry standards required by North Spire. While the compliance team finalized the corporate rejections in their towering glass offices, I prepared my own documentation in my small editing studio. I bought a slim, black leather binder and meticulously organized the physical evidence of my family's choices. The process felt incredibly clinical, exactly like logging raw footage for a documentary. I printed the blank response cards they had ignored. I included the high-resolution photograph of the empty wooden chairs shining under the apple trees. I transcribed the agonizing voicemail my mother left me, and I printed a clear screenshot of the leaked text message where she explicitly ordered the family to skip my small wedding because I was perfectly fine on my own. Finally, I placed the printed flight itineraries proving 23 people had eagerly traveled 1,874 miles to Sedona just weeks before. I did not assemble this binder to launch an unprovoked attack. I had zero intention of walking into the summit and screaming at them in the lobby. This binder was a shield. It was my absolute defense mechanism, prepared entirely in case they attempted to corner me in public, cry crocodile tears, and twist the narrative to cast themselves as the loving, supportive relatives they desperately pretended to be. If they tried to bend the truth, I was going to hand them the receipts. During my deep dive into organizing my old digital files to ensure I had everything backed up, I stumbled across an archived folder from my university days. It contained dozens of intricate, hand-drawn wedding monograms and custom branding concepts I had sketched out for free when my mother casually claimed she needed some fresh inspiration for a difficult client. Out of morbid curiosity, I ran a reverse image search on a few of the more distinctive floral designs. The search results hit me like a physical blow to the stomach, stealing the breath right out of my lungs. Elise had not just used them for temporary inspiration. For over 5 years, Velvet Lane Celebrations had been actively using my exact designs as premium deliverables for their highest-paying clients. She had built massive mood boards, printed luxury dinner menus, and stamped expensive wax seals using the exact art I had created late at night in my college dorm room. There was zero credit given to my name. There was absolutely zero financial compensation offered. She had simply taken my work, slapped her corporate logo on it, and sold it for thousands of dollars. This discovery unlocked a brand new, terrifying layer of clarity. The pain shifted from a dull ache into a sharp, blinding realization. The Galloway family did not simply ignore me because I was boring or unimportant. They actively ignored me as a person, so they could comfortably exploit me as an invisible, unpaid resource. I was the silent, sturdy foundation they built their glittering empires upon. They demanded my labor, my artistic vision, and my quiet compliance. But they fiercely denied me a seat at the table. They were perfectly happy to consume what I created, as long as they never had to acknowledge the creator. The night before we were scheduled to leave for the summit in Atlanta, I was folding clothes and packing my suitcase when my phone chimed with a notification from a mutual industry contact. They had forwarded a post from my mother's highly trafficked public business account. Elise had uploaded a grainy vintage photograph of the two of us from when I was perhaps 7 years old. We were standing in a manicured garden. Elise looked flawless, staring directly into the camera lens with a practiced smile, while I was looking down at my shoes, clearly uncomfortable in a stiff dress. The caption beneath the photo was a masterpiece of manipulative, calculated public relations. "Always so incredibly proud of my beautiful firstborn," the caption read. "Watching her grow into such a talented woman and a stunning bride has been the greatest joy of my life. Family truly is the ultimate celebration." She was actively laying the groundwork. She knew she was walking into a room full of industry heavyweights where her new son-in-law was the keynote speaker. She wanted everyone in that room to believe we were a united, fiercely loving front. She was using my childhood image to purchase goodwill and establish a false narrative of maternal devotion before she even stepped foot in the building. 10 years ago, a post like that would have sent me into an emotional tailspin. I would have questioned my own reality, wondering if she really did love me deep down, hoping that maybe this time her public affection would translate into private warmth. But standing in my bedroom now, holding the phone, I felt nothing but a profound, overwhelming exhaustion with her lies. I did not leave a comment correcting her. I did not send her an angry text message demanding she take it down. I simply clicked the 3 dots in the upper right corner of the screen, reported the post as misleading, and permanently blocked her account from my feed. The digital cord was finally cut. I set the phone down, zipped my suitcase closed, and looked at the black binder resting on my wooden desk. The air in the room felt incredibly light. The storm was absolutely coming. The heavy clouds were gathering right over Atlanta, but for the very first time in my life, I was not terrified of the thunder. I was not going to that summit to beg for their love, nor was I going to scream and cry about how badly they had hurt me. I was traveling to Atlanta not as the abandoned daughter who was always pushed toward the kitchen door, but as a woman who had finally, unequivocally, stopped negotiating her own worth. I was ready. The Southeastern Hospitality Summit took place inside a magnificently restored railway station in the heart of Atlanta. The architecture featured soaring vaulted ceilings, exposed brick walls, and massive arched windows that let in the crisp evening light. The massive hall was packed to the absolute brim with industry journalists, wealthy private investors, luxury venue owners, and high-end wedding planners. It was a room entirely populated by people who made their fortunes by selling the illusion of perfection. Jonah stood on the main stage under the bright spotlight to deliver the keynote address. He did not wear a tie. Maintaining that quiet, solid presence that had drawn me to him in the first place, he spoke eloquently about the concept of trust in hospitality. He told the silent, captivated audience that a beautiful venue means absolutely nothing if the people operating it do not know how to keep their basic commitments to their clients, to their vendors, and most importantly, to their own families. I was sitting in the very front row, right in the center. I was not there simply as the supportive wife of the chief executive officer. I was sitting in that chair because 2 months prior, the Summit Board of Directors had seen my latest documentary short film. They were so moved by the visual storytelling that they independently hired me to design and direct the entire visual campaign for the summit. I had earned my seat. When the applause finally faded and Jonah stepped down from the stage, the massive crowd began to filter toward the cocktail reception area. We had barely taken 5 steps before my mother materialized out of the crowd. Elise intentionally intercepted us right in front of 3 very prominent members of the summit organizing committee. She was wearing a stunning emerald gown, radiating a manicured, maternal warmth that made my skin crawl. Sloan and Rhett were hovering right behind her, both of them looking pale and desperate, clearly hoping to drag Jonah into a quiet corner to discuss their failing businesses. "Piper, my beautiful girl, and Jonah, what an absolutely brilliant speech," Elise projected, ensuring her voice carried to the important board members standing nearby. She reached out to touch my arm, playing the role of the devoted matriarch flawlessly. "I was just telling the committee members here how our family has always stood right behind Piper. We have always been her biggest champions." I did not pull my arm away. I did not raise my voice. I simply unzipped my leather tote bag and pulled out the slim, black binder. I flipped it open to the very first page. "That is an interesting way to phrase it." "Mom," I said, my voice perfectly level and calm. The sheer lack of emotion in my tone caused the surrounding conversations to falter and die out. I looked down at the printed screenshot. "Because exactly 5 days before my wedding, you sent this message to the family group chat." I read her exact words out loud, articulating every single syllable. "Do not anyone waste a Saturday driving up to the mountain for Piper's little wedding. She chose a cheap venue on purpose so we would not have to be involved. She is always perfectly fine on her own." Elise's face completely drained of color. Her jaw parted, but no sound came out. I turned the page of the binder and held it up for her, and the board members, to see. It was the photograph Lena had taken. It showed my 5 friends sitting alone in a sea of empty wooden chairs. I turned the page again, revealing the printed flight records proving that 23 members of the Galloway family had happily flown across the country to Sedona just a few weeks prior. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not make a theatrical scene. I simply presented the cold, documented truth. That absolute clinical calmness was what caused the air in the room to turn to ice. The board members shifted uncomfortably, their eyes wide with poorly concealed shock as they stared at the undisputed evidence of Elise's cruelty. Rhett completely panicked. He stepped around my frozen mother, holding his hands up toward my husband in a desperate gesture of corporate solidarity. "Jonah, listen. Let us just step away from the family drama for a second," Rhett pleaded, his voice cracking with sheer terror. "Let us grab a drink and talk business, man to man. Stonehaven needs that acquisition capital, and I know we can make a deal." Right at that exact second, a tall man in a tailored gray suit stepped forward from the crowd. It was Marcus, the head of acquisitions for North Spire. Jonah had explicitly instructed him to handle the rejections formally if my family attempted to bypass the system. "Mr. Holloway," Marcus said, his voice ringing with professional finality, "I am the director of acquisitions. Your portfolio for Stonehaven House was officially rejected by our compliance department yesterday afternoon. We do not invest in properties with heavily falsified revenue metrics, nor do we assume chronic debt from unpaid local vendors. Furthermore, Mrs. Galloway, Velvet Lane." Celebrations did not meet the ethical transparency standards required for our national partner program. The rejection was absolute. It was delivered in public, leaving them absolutely nowhere to hide. Elise frantically turned to my father, who was standing at the edge of the circle looking like a broken man. "Warren, say something," she hissed. "Tell them we are family." Warren looked at me. His shoulders slumped, and the last remnants of his dignified facade crumbled. "I am sorry, Piper," he whispered, his voice trembling. "I knew she sent the message. I knew she told them not to go. I just chose to stay quiet, because I did not want to cause a fight in the house. I thought staying out of it was the safest thing to do." I looked straight into my father's eyes, feeling the last, lingering thread of my childhood attachment snap cleanly in two. "Silence is not neutral, Dad," I told him, the words leaving my mouth like heavy stones. "It always sides with the person doing the hurting." Before anyone could utter another word, the microphone on the main stage crackled back to life. The president of the Hospitality Summit, a highly respected woman in the industry, beamed out at the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please turn your attention to the screens," the president announced. "I would like to invite the visionary director of our new storytelling campaign to the stage to introduce her work. Please welcome the incredibly talented Piper Galloway." The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. For my entire life, Elise, Sloane, and Rhett had desperately chased the spotlight, selling fake smiles and curated images to the highest bidder. But the person called to the stage in a room full of the most powerful people in their industry was not them. It was the daughter they had repeatedly shoved toward the kitchen door. I was chosen precisely because my entire life experience had taught me the true value of authenticity. I knew exactly what it meant when people showed up. and I knew exactly what it meant when they did not. I closed my black binder, handed it to Jonah, and walked away from my family without looking back. The aftermath fell into place with swift, merciless precision. Without the North Spire bailout, Stonehaven House Collection completely collapsed under the weight of its own debt. Rhett's lenders seized his properties within 90 days, selling them off for fractions of their perceived value. Velvet Lane celebrations bled out publicly as the industry whispers regarding her unpaid vendors turned into formal lawsuits, causing her to lose her final major corporate client. Sloane quietly deleted her social media accounts, finally realizing that the endless string of sponsorships and favors had dried up the moment her aesthetic cracked. Warren remained in a quiet, heavily mortgaged house, entirely consumed by a regret that he could never, ever fix. As for Jonah and me, we purchased the abandoned train station up in Asheville. We spent a year completely restoring the brickwork and the massive windows, transforming the echoing space into a thriving, creative sanctuary. We named it Cedar Frame Studio. It became a place where we told real, honest stories about people who actually loved each other. When you walk through the heavy wooden doors of the studio today, you will see a large, framed photograph hanging proudly on the main gallery wall. It is the picture of the lush green grass, the apple trees, and the dozens of empty wooden chairs from my wedding day. I do not keep it there to feel the pain anymore. I keep it there as a permanent, beautiful reminder of the exact day I finally stopped trying to claim a seat at a table that was never meant for me in the first place. Thank you all so much for listening to my story today, and please let me know down in the comments where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. If you enjoyed this journey, please make sure to subscribe to the Helena Revenge Stories channel, like this video, and show your support by hitting that hype button so this story can be heard by even more people.